Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we've got another episode of the Your Favorite X-Men podcast for you, where we explore the characters of the X-Men universe with some of their most passionate fans. And today, I'm very happy because I've got my good friend Jackson here with me, who we also happen to do another podcast together on his channel called The Beggars Canyon Boys. So, Jackson, first, thank you for joining me. And then, second, do you want to tell people what Beggars Canyon Boys is and why they might want to check that out before we go full mutant deep dive?
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, excited to talk X-Men. But yeah, the Beggars Canyon Boys podcast that I actually do with my friend Ryan, the host of this podcast, and we are talking about Star Wars over there, if you couldn't guess from the title. But we're going through the whole history of Star Wars because I don't know if this is news to any of your loyal fans and followers, but Ryan has actually never watched Star Wars movies before, so I felt
Mhm.
like it was my duty as his friend to take him through all of the Star Wars content in release order. Not literally every single thing, but we're going through it year by year, watching the movies, reading the comic books. Hey,
For anyone who doesn't know, there's some pretty rough Marvel ones that come out pretty early on, and we've got a fun episode about those ones too. So,
yeah. So
all right, well, getting Star Wars out of here, no more mention of Star Wars
okay,
in this
okay, okay.
podcast. Dramatic reveal for who your favorite X-Men character is, Jackson. A little drum roll. Brrr, favorite character is.
It's Cyclops, ladies and gentlemen, the
Hey,
ruby quartz man himself.
Ruby Quartz King, the
Hmm.
the broken bird, as Lee Forster referred to him as in the issue we took a look at for this episode.
Oh
Okay,
man, what
but
a good issue.
getting way ahead of myself. I did want to ask before we jumped into reading material, sort of why Cyclops was the X-Men character that stood out to you, why he was the one that resonated most.
Well, before really getting deep into the comics of X-Men, I really don't think I ever would have guessed that Cyclops would be my favorite because I guess until just, 4 or 5 years ago, I was only pretty casually a fan of X-Men, and I had read some things here and there, but I didn't really do a full deep dive. And based on the movies and everything, Cyclops kind of always gets short end of the stick in the movies and is never really characterized interestingly. But once I started to, go back to the beginning, dig into the Claremont era, and now I'm all the way up to right after Secret Wars and in my read through of all the X-Men stuff. Yeah, he quickly became one of my absolute favorite characters. I feel like I always find myself loving these characters that a lot of people think are the boring leader characters.
Yes.
I guess the main other example I can think of is Leonardo in the Ninja Turtles, and Optimus Prime and stuff like that, where it's
Yeah.
yeah, they don't have the most personality out of everybody, but they actually have a lot of burden on their shoulders. So they've actually had to go through a lot of trauma and take responsibility. Where someone like Michelangelo or Nightcrawler, they can just chill and join in fights and stuff. But
Those are essentially the characters where it's like if you say you like them in the franchise, it's almost like the boring pick. The
yeah.
I don't think this. I don't think Scott Summers is like the vanilla ice cream of X-Men, but I feel like that is what some of the more Scott Summers boring Boy Scout haters would say, you know?
Yeah, which I mean, I would absolutely say there are eras and, comics that he's in that he is very boring and just that super generic leader character. So I can understand where some of that criticism comes from. But in the hands of good writers, especially Claremont, Morrison, and I mean, I haven't read the Hickman stuff yet, but I'm very excited to get to that. But
Oh
even
yeah.
Bendis and stuff, they make him tortured and fascinating, and he's constantly going through cycles of I have to take a break from the team because I'm just so traumatized. Okay, I can't leave my X-Men. I'm coming back. And that's just his whole thing over and over again, but I'll always enjoy that.
Yeah, that's funny because so for me with Scott, it's weird because I started X-Men with Grant Morrison's run, which really I think does have like a pretty interesting version of Scott that I really do like kind of trending more disillusioned, willing to be a little more controversial style Scott. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I was also like bouncing between Claremont stuff with Scott, which again I also do not think is bad at all, but just maybe like the melding of those two at the time as I was like just getting into the universe, reading all the characters, getting to know their characterizations. Like, I don't know, it didn't work for me. And like the that part of Scott that you described better did was getting to me. In my head, it was like Scott's just being whiny. He's being so whiny about all his issues. But it really is him reconciling with like repressed rage and frustration in kind of
Hmm.
like a system where he's trying to change it, but it never changes despite his best efforts. And like the team, it works, but it doesn't work. It's just a very complex situation that is going on. And he's also trying to like adhere to Professor Xavier's ideals, but also those are very broken and fragile too. So it's like,
Yeah, I think in that build from like Morrison to Brubaker to Avengers versus X-Men, like he, yeah, is just finally like stepping out of the shadow of Professor Xavier and always like, oh, well, he's the leader of the team in the field, but it's really
mhm.
still like Professor X's group at the end of the day. I really I love gosh, what's the name of the Brubaker story where the third like Summers brother is revealed? Dark Genesis or something like that.
I know what you're talking about. I'm not sure I've read it, but is that where Gabriel Summers is revealed?
Yes, and it's that like Professor X during the like first mission of the new X-Men to Genosha, he had actually sent like or not Genosha, Krakoa, the original Krakoa, like
Yeah.
sent like a different team of people that he was first like having be a trial run of the new X-Men, and
Oh,
they all
really?
died except for Gabriel, and then Professor X like wiped Cyclops's memory of this to like have him, forget that he ever had a brother and stuff.
Hmm. Oh man, yeah. Not again. Kind of a on this channel I bring it up a lot, but kind of like a tally against Charles Xavier's and him being sort of like the idealized mentor for these poor kids.
For
But
real. I mean, he's just fully willing to manipulate people's minds without consent like all the time.
yeah, so I did also forget to mention this earlier, but I do think it's pretty interesting, and I think people on the channel find it pretty interesting too, that you have not read anything of the Krakoa era, and you've kept pretty spoiler free on it too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I am. Well, I get. Are we like allowed to say any spoilers on this? Like,
Well, I say 100% okay. For me, comic books also are about the journey, not the destination. So I don't care that much about spoilers for comics in
y-
general. But
yeah.
also, Krakoa era is over. So I feel like, if you're watching this and you care, you've probably read at least what of the Krakoa era you want to. You may not have finished it. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's not like I know anything to spoil, really. I'm aware that they, set up Krakoa as like a new sort of like isolated mutant society and stuff. That's truly all I know about it. I know eventually Storm has a group on Mars. That's pretty much the extent of my knowledge about it.
Well, we'll keep you still in the dark, but I am really curious because I think you it sounds like have read a lot more of the contemporary X-Men stuff than I have, and I've been more like Claremont era focused and then more just picking and choosing in the contemporary era, but you're trying to go sort of chronologically through modern era to get to Krakoa, right?
Yeah, I'm not reading like literally every single book, but I'll at least give every one like a chance for a few issues. And if I just like hate it or it seems like totally pointless, I'll just stop reading it. But yeah, I'm reading most of at least like the main series.
Gotcha. Well, just sort of makes me curious, like as you watch how Scott evolves over these different runs, what trajectory, if you had to predict, do you think like the Krakoa era Scott is going to take on? And I'm also curious, sort of the other side of that coin, based on what you've seen, working with the foundation of what's already there, where would you like to see them sort of explore with Scott in the future?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because, like, right where I am, he died in the middle of Secret Wars.
Yeah.
And I haven't read, like, I mean, I know he just, like, comes back to life when they rebuild the multiverse and stuff. So I know he's back. And also, like, the original X-Men, like, past version of him is around still right
Yeah.
now, too.
When did he
So
die in Secret Wars? Because this is a weird thing for me where like I read all that stuff before I picked up any X-Men books. So
mm.
like the X-Men parts of those books are way more blur in my mind.
So, like, right before Secret Wars, he has like the Phoenix egg, and he's like, I'm gonna use this when the final incursion happens. During Secret Wars, I don't know, he's like on the life raft and has like Phoenix powers, and then he fights Doctor Doom, and Doctor Doom kills him. I can't remember
Uh,
like the super details of it, but I remember it's like the Phoenix is gonna kill Doctor Doom, but no, he just, I don't know, one shots him or something. But I would guess that, well, he kind of had a similar like trajectory, I'm assuming, because right before this in Avengers versus X-Men is when he also was possessed by the Phoenix and kills Professor X, like
yeah,
when he's in the Phoenix persona. And then after that, he's kind of like a revolutionary, like mutant terrorist, not quite, but like an extremist, I guess you would say.
sure.
And
Yeah.
he has like a more violent team with like Magneto and Emma Frost and stuff.
And Magic. Don't leave her out.
No, she's there too. You're right. And
Just that is that not the whole team? I can't remember there being anyone else on the team.
no, there's those new people like Gold Balls and stuff.
Oh, okay. All
Um,
right.
and like that girl that makes time bubbles.
Yeah.
Well,
Krakoa era fans know these characters.
oh yeah, okay. That's cool.
hmm
I'm glad that they keep going because I could easily see them just being dropped, but they're cool.
Yeah, this is
But I
great. I just want to say this is great because usually when we're on Jackson's channel doing our other podcast, I'm the one who, everyone's winking and smiling about spoilers of Star Wars things I don't know, but I think we're all sort of smiling over here to ourselves right now, thinking about Jackson mentioning these characters not knowing anything about the Krakoa era too. Very
Oh,
fun, very fun.
that is exciting. I know you've mentioned to me before that Gold Balls actually plays an important role in Krakoa, so that'll be
I've said too much. I've said too much.
interesting to see. Hey, no, that's okay. I have no idea what that would be, so
Yep.
I'm curious. Well, I guess to get back to your question, I would guess that he kind of goes on a similar like monk-like journey where he becomes like even more like cold and distant and like I can't have relationships with anybody because I'm just gonna hurt people and stuff, but like I will always fight for the mute. I don't know, I feel like he could go like a little bit Magneto mode for a while, but I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, very, very interesting. Because you bring it up, I don't know if I've picked your brain about this before, the X-Men. I'm just curious, real quick. You're a Cyclops fan. I think I have a guess of what you might say, but relationship-wise, do you have a preference? Do you lean away him with Emma Frost, him with Jean Grey? Maybe you're a rare
Madeline
Cyclops and
Pryor.
Cyclops. Yeah, or yeah, Madeline Pryor too. That's another one.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you though.
No, no, you're totally fine.
Yeah, I forgot about Psylocke.
Yeah, I was just kidding with her because he gets briefly enamored about her every
Yeah,
once in a while.
she's a beautiful woman, Gene. I can't help it if I'm staring at her butt. That's pretty much like the extent of his Psylocke relationship, if
I
I'm
can see
remembering
the shot in
correctly.
my head of her walking out of the water and him oozing over it.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. That's like early 90s, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Or late 80s, I think, actually, but not that it matters.
I don't really, I'm not like a Jean Grey hater or anything, but I
hmm
do find both Madeline Pryor and Emma Frost to be like much more interesting characters than Jean.
Uh-oh.
Hey, I don't know.
It's kind of a
I mean,
pitchforks comment.
I know you're a big Emma Frost fan, but man, I feel like this sounds so like dirty, but honestly, him with Madeline Pryor is like my favorite era of X-Men, so maybe I am a little biased because of just the whole era, but I really like that relationship. Not in necessarily a way of like, oh, I think it's the most like cute and healthy of all the relationships, but I think like story-wise it is, and like character-wise, it's one of the more interesting things that makes Scott like a real weirdo for a while and like
Absolutely.
I don't know, like makes him an asshole in pretty interesting ways and creates a lot of friction with the team with him for the first time, really. And yeah, a fascinating era. So I think that's my favorite relationship to read. I don't mean that like, oh, I ship them, I stand them the most, but that's probably my favorite to read.
Well, I was gonna say I will agree with your answer if you're saying that exactly what you said, that that's just one of the relationships that you really, really like to read, not one that like should be a Scott relationship in the future. Because I kind of think that one is certainly a one and done thing, and also because it just worked so well in Inferno. Like I don't think it could. Maybe I mean maybe there's room for it to be replicated again or like explored different corners of it in unique ways. But I'm almost like let's not touch Inferno anymore, even though we've already had three other Infernos. But let's not touch
Yeah,
like the core elements of Inferno with Madeline and Scott's relationship, I guess.
I know there's another event called Inferno during Krakoa, so I don't even know what that's about, but
Yeah, I thought that was the second Inferno. Then I learned that at some point before that, in like the 2000s, there's also another Inferno.
oh yeah.
But not really a spoiler. But I don't really recall Madeline Pryor even being involved in the Krakoa Inferno.
Right, right. Well, I
So
would agree. I don't think she needs to really come back into his life. I think the whole kind of thing of like, oh, who do you want this person to end up with is I'm kind of I'm calling you out. I'm calling you out. I think that I can't believe you would ask me that.
hey, that's fine. You know, I just it's interesting to hear your thoughts on it, even if your thought is that you hate the question and you hate me for asking it.
No, no, I'm just joking. I think if they were like real people and I wanted them to be happy, probably Emma, just keep Jean dead, have he got her blessing to be with Emma.
Yeah.
Let's just leave it
You're
there.
not just saying all this to butter me up, are you?
I no, I mean it.
Okay.
They're a power like
Because
that's
I don't know if you know my opinion on this is that I actually don't care about Scott and Emma being together.
okay. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't know. I mean, I know you really like Emma Frost, but
Yeah, so I prefer her as like an autonomous individual in stories rather than like like in a relationship. I like
sure,
her
yeah, yeah.
with friendships rather than like romantic stuff. I don't it always feels weird to me with her. With Scott it's done the best, but I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't ring true for Emma's character, I guess, to me.
Yeah, I like it when, she does have like feelings for him, but like she just essentially is never gonna ever say it, and like he kind of is like a little weirdo, so he likes like he likes that like humiliation or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I like them as like two like powerhouse leaders when they're both like co-leading the X-Men together. Like that's really cool, I think.
Yeah. And hey, Jackson, I do just have to like mention it here and a little shout out to episode 3 of the Your Favorite X-Men podcast with awesome guest Alex, who's an awesome artist too. Jean Grey, I think it is another character like Cyclops where it's easy to be like, oh, kind of a boring character on the spectrum of like cool characters. But, Alex convinced me that episode to like look at Jean Grey from this perspective of like a rejection of matriarchal destiny. And that's colored my readings of her ever since. And I think it works really well. And I kind of really like reading Jean Grey from that perspective. So I'll just, I'll leave you with that
Huh.
thought. Maybe you can recant on some of your Jean hatred.
First of all never said that I hated Jean. I
I know.
actually do like her.
I'm trying to
I
get hate
just
comments so I get more engagement.
Oh, okay, smart. I do think that's a really interesting lens, though. I think the whole like I don't know, so much of Jean and Scott's storylines revolve around like them wanting to have a regular family life, but that
Hmm.
just like not being possible because of their situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We also, as I mentioned earlier, took a look at Uncanny X-Men issue 144 to discuss today. It was the one Jackson mentioned really enjoying, particularly for Scott Summers, Cyclops. And basically, this issue takes place after the death of Jean Grey, and Scott ends up encountering this demon Despair,
Mm-hmm.
which is, old school funny comic name, but really nice issue. And then yeah, there's this like really nice internal battle of Scott's like guilts and traumas that go on in here. So yeah, awesome pick. I can see why you like this issue for Scott.
I think it, really exemplifies a lot of the things I love about Scott Summers and especially in the Claremont era. Because I mean, it's like what we were talking about before. Like he's getting over the death of Jean Grey, the love of his life,
Hmm.
and to my memory so far, he hasn't had any other romantic interests yet in like the whole history of
Yeah.
X-Men at
I
this
mean, Lee
point.
Forrester's all over him this issue, but yeah,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
correct. Yet.
Um, that's so funny how It really made me miss like the Claremont Arrow stuff, just the way it's written, and like
Yeah.
how he's just like on a fishing boat, like working as a fisherman,
Dude, it's the
and
best. I love it. It's so
it's
like
ama
there's so much dramaticism seeped into it. Like, such a fun superhero soap opera that
the
touches on
prose of the
great subjects.
it was just making me smile so much. All the text boxes, like so, like just the melodrama of these captions, like when he's in this vision that despair is making him have, and he's at like the wedding of him and Jean, and
Hmm.
then she like takes off his goggles, and she's like, "Nothing will happen." He does as she bids him, and his worst nightmare comes to pass. He rushes to her side, cradles the bloody pulp that had once been Jean Grey in his arms, trying to will life back into her shattered form. It's like, Jesus Christ,
Dude,
we
I
don't get them like that
know.
anymore.
The language of that is so well done that when I looked to the next panel, I almost was like expecting to see that bloody pulp as described, like of Jean
Yeah,
Grey. But obviously, it's a Marvel comic still, and they're like not showing stuff like that, at least to that degree at this level yet. But it is just like really fantastic and fun to read. Claremont just captures like a really special energy that I love.
but him on the fishing boat, like just his sweater and him like almost getting into a little fist fight with that guy, and then they're like,
Yeah.
"No, it's cool. Let's actually shake hands." And it's just like,
I mean, isn't it
"Oh
amazing
man."
also like the sense of community that like Claremont's able to build in tiny panels like that, along with the artists, of course, too. But like just all the crew like laughing behind them as these two gentlemen like are shaking hands, coming over their disagreement. And these are like people
Yeah.
that we've just met. And it's like already feels like such a lived-in space that like Cyclops is trying to truly fit into.
Oh, I know. I mean, it says like, oh, it's been a few weeks or months or something, I forget. But like you kind of feel that even though we probably only spend like a page and a half on the boat, maybe if that. Like it's really effective or efficient and effective. Yeah.
Yeah, I also
Um
like how he is still sort of, I don't mean it in a to denigrate him, but like kind of a square with them too, where he's like they kind of have to force him to go out with them, play pool and have some drinks.
Yeah, I and I love too how I mean this is a little later, but when he's on the boat with Lee and they're going to her dad's house, he's like, I can tell she's very attracted to me, and I like her too, but I can't get into a relationship right now, with the whole thing of like my wife getting possessed by the Phoenix and killing herself and stuff.
Yeah, super funny. And also, I mean,
I guess not his wife, sorry.
well, good call though on his part. I mean, Jean Grey does not die.
Yeah, like ever. But
Yeah.
but this also before that has like in the bar sequence another awesome Cyclops moment that I feel like is happening with him all the time where like something happened where he's kind of either lost control of his eyes where they go
Hmm.
crazy every time he opens them or like it's not coming out like the beam isn't happening at all. And at this point he's like in some weakened state where he can't control it. So in order to like practice the precision of it and do like a gentle blast, he hits the pool ball and sinks all the pool balls while his friends are looking at the Buccaneers Steelers game on the TV.
Yeah, I know. That was such a fun little Scott moment too, where it's just like still taking every opportunity to try and continue training his powers, and he
Yeah.
does it in his own like kind of silly Scott dadish way.
Yeah, like, well, I don't want to break the pool table here.
Yeah, also a pretty I mean, if you think about it, pretty risky thing for Scott to do, as he's been trying very hard not to like reveal his powers at all to these guys. And
Yeah,
then the second they just turn to look at a game, he's like lifts up his visors and does a trick shot with his
I mean,
optic blast.
even if he hadn't have done that with his eyes, I think if they had turned around and saw all the pool balls going in, they'd still be like suspicious of what had
Yeah.
happened when they turned their back.
Yeah, I'd be like, that guy just used his hands to throw all the balls in the holes.
Yeah, he's cheated somehow.
But I do think that did remind me, I wanted to talk about like Cyclops and his powers because, as I was getting ready for this and like looking at Cyclops things and thinking about the character more, I have remembered how sad I get when I sort of think about his powers, just because, like, I guess the idea of him always being worried about looking at the people he loves because he doesn't want to hurt them is like, I don't know, it's a pretty impactful thing to me. It like makes me sad when I think about it. And when he is worried about it, which also again like represents his worry and struggle as a leader, I don't know, it makes me sad. sad.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great little metaphor for, like, his personality. Everybody that gets too close to him ends up getting hurt in some way or another. His powers are sad, but they're really pretty badass as well. I think it's a really like specific, unique kind of power. I guess, Superman, or does Superman have laser eyes? Yeah,
He
right?
does, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, that came first, but whatever. Not in the concentrated single beam.
Yeah, I wonder, I guess, to like outsiders of comics in the X-Men universe specifically who look at Cyclops, to them they may just see like similar to Superman, like, oh, that guy shoots laser beams. But to me, it like is so different to that in my head. I never think about it like he's shooting laser beams, even though, I mean, I guess the difference between laser beam and optic blast visually might not look that different, but I don't know. To me, it makes a difference and it colors him a little differently.
I just think there's something about it where it's so like it's like a power that's so specific to, like, just this one part of your body. It's the one thing that he can do, and it's not really even a power. It's just that he has the visor that has kind of funneled it into being a power. So it's really just like all from him, like using it in the way he does. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
because his whole body, he just has a normal like man's body. It's
yeah,
not
he's
like,
just a dude.
yeah, so that makes him like a little weird and vulnerable, and like something nitty gritty about that power and the just regularness of him.
Man, and I do not think that it was probably part of the original intention, like when creating Cyclops as a character with that power set. And maybe it was, maybe I'm not being charitable enough, but I also again think it works well as a metaphor for like Cyclops's later in like more contemporary stuff, like dealing more with his repressed rage and like starting to do things that are a little more morally ambiguous. Just because it makes me think of like, okay, if we're like thinking of the issue 144 that we looked at, we see him like have to be very strategic and fine tuned about how he's using his optic blast to do that little trick shot, of course. But he does that in combat situations too. He has to be like very specific with his blasts. But I'm thinking now of like the end of Inferno when he's just like completely upset, rage filled at Sinister for orchestrating everything in his life, basically, leading up to that. And he just completely lets go with the optic blasts. And it just, I don't know if you know this panel that I'm talking about, but it just like incinerates Sinister. Like you see his
Yeah.
bones, and it's an awesome panel.
Oh yeah.
That honestly, Inferno also really, really made me like Scott Summers because of all this stuff. But yeah, so I think it works in that aspect too, which, like I said, I don't think maybe was original intention, but writers have ran with it in a really, really satisfying way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, it just is something that works so well for his character of, like, I don't know, pretty much just what you just said of like he's got so much pent up anger because of how much trauma and manipulation and bad things have happened in his life that, any moment he could just unleash.
Yeah, yeah. For people who are maybe, I guess it's this, I usually ask this question, but it's a little different for Cyclops, I guess, since he's pretty much in every X-Men story. But for people who are interested in the character of Cyclops, but don't necessarily know where to start with like something more Cyclops focused, I guess, which runs would you say, or even like particular stories would you say that you think are good like Cyclops starting points to sort of get like a sample of what the character can be at his best, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Claremont run is like an obvious answer, but that's like such a long, sweeping thing. So I guess
Yeah. No,
individual
I recommend
stories,
everyone
like,
read those 16 years though. It's worth it.
well, absolutely. I fully agree with you, and I think that's where like Cyclops becomes an actual character.
Hmm.
But I think maybe the first time when he's really like getting into this interesting zone is the Dark Phoenix saga. I mean, not to make that more about him than about Jean or whatever, but I think it is a really interesting like time for Cyclops, especially those
Yeah.
issues where they're just like out on the moon surface alone together. And that's when you really like feel like, okay, like this guy will sacrifice everything for Jean. And then like the whole post era of that is when he has to reconcile with that. So I guess like Dark Phoenix through Inferno is really good Scott stuff. Then if you want something more contemporary, I would say like Schism is pretty interesting, him and Wolverine, being at odds and fractioning off into the two different teams of X-Men, that just kind of shows Cyclops in a more extremism mindset and ready to take drastic measures and really start thinking about like mutant rights in a
Hmm.
more adult and serious way, in like this revolutionary way that I do really like, where there's so many X-Men stories where they're just sort of like, oh yeah, well, we still have to like give people the benefit of the doubt and we have to like be nice and whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, like I don't know. That's when it's really brought up of Cyclops, confronting Captain America and being like, hey, like you guys don't care about us. So we're gonna like look out for ourselves. We have to make a statement of like, you can't mess with us or we will mess back with you. That's a really cool era of him, like Schism Avengers versus X-Men era.
Yeah, man, this all makes hearing this makes me really excited for you to read the Krakoa era and see like some of the expansions of those ideas and like the ideas that are on the periphery of that get explored too. Because if you like that stuff, I think you will like a lot of the stuff that comes out of the Krakoa era. I think. I also think there's plenty of things you won't like about it, but we'll I'm gonna be so curious when you get there to know.
I'm very excited too, because I mean I knew a lot of X-Men spoilers like before Secret Wars era, and like you said, I mean I kind of agree that like even if you know big plot spoilers, like it doesn't necessarily detract from the actual reading experience. But I don't know any like plot spoilers about the era, so I'm excited to go into it like pretty blind, other than just a few like super vague concepts that I know are going on during it.
Okay, I did also want to mention because since you were talking a little bit about Cyclops and his leadership, it reminded me of a point, and I'm sort of trying to think back to the issue. I should have reread it before this, but I'm just remembering it now. But and I forget which issue it is, but if you recall, like Storm had lost her powers, and then she has her whole arc where she like becomes comfortable with like her just being Storm and herself, like the goddess without powers.
Right.
And then she basically goes and it's the Cyclops versus Storm who is going to lead the X-Men. Do you know this issue that I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah.
Yeah, and then it's Storm bests Cyclops when he has his powers and she doesn't at a time when he's like already feeling super inadequate about his like
Mm.
abilities as a team leader. I don't really remember too much about it. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts and like maybe what you think, what kind of turning point I guess Claremont was trying to push Cyclops into there.
So I'm trying to. I mean, this is gonna sound like I'm sure like most people just have better memory than me about all this stuff. So I'm trying to remember like where in the Madeline Pryor relationship that happens. Is this like after Inferno? And
It's before Inferno, I think
no,
for
it
sure.
it
It's like,
is.
yeah, it's I'm also trying to pinpoint it too. I don't know how far before Inferno it is the issue, and I also don't know how far after like Life Death it is. Like I don't remember how long because I have now stupid not stupid. I don't dislike the show, but I have issues with the way they did Life Death. I have like X-Men 97's version of like Storm's arc of Life Death stuck in my head now, which happens in like 1 second. Whereas in the comic, it happens over like multiple issues and is like a big arc for her. So like I get it mixed up now with the other media.
Okay, okay. So this is after Scott and Madeline have had Nathan Summers' baby.
Wait, that's true. Is this not also? I guess the answer to the question is just like thinking about what happens next narratively. Because is this also not sort of what the segue to him finally taking a step away from the X-Men and just being like, okay, I'll devote myself to family time, I guess.
Yes, and then very quickly, I think editorially it was the move to start X Factor because he, after the fight with Storm, he does leave and go to just live with Nathan and Madeline, but then very quickly becomes like, I think they get like attacked by a shark or something, and so then he's like, okay, I have to.
Actually, Jackson, a little correction. It's an octopus,
Okay. I'm
I
sorry, but
think.
that is when I'm pretty sure that's when that happens. They try to go back to Alaska, but then their plane crashes and
Yes, yeah,
they
because they're gonna
fight.
honeymoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they send Charles Xavier a picture of them in bed together.
Oh, that's right.
And there's a panel of him like looking at it fondly. It's super funny. It's like, oh, a little weird. It's like a post-sex pic of them.
Yeah, well, that's just what people did back then.
Yeah. I guess times have
Um,
just changed.
so then essentially, he's like, "Oh, I just can't do it. I can't like just sit around at home. I got to start X Factor."
You were so right that this is like a the turning point for Scott where he becomes super interesting as a character because also X Factor is like such a dumb idea that the characters, the entire foundation of it are being like, should we really be posing as mutant hunters like who hate mutants and want to like
Yeah.
get rid of mutants? Like, isn't this a bad PR look?
X
Like,
Factor becomes cool, but like the first like 5 or 6 issues are like, okay, I just have to pretend like these people aren't doing this
yeah.
because it's so stupid.
I do love X Factor and I love Louise Simonson. I just like and I think it's done as best as it can be with like the whole conceit of it being kind of as stupid as it is. But I also do kind of like that they're all like, is this a bad idea? Because I
Yeah.
guess if you're going to like double down on it, at least show that the characters are a little shaky on the whole premise too. I don't know. I don't know if that does work or it doesn't. In my head, I kind of like it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, it's been a while since I've read those, so I don't know, but I definitely like it when like, something happens and they realize, oh, it's a bad idea. And isn't it that like Cameron Hodge, whose idea it was in the first place, like ends up being a bad
Yes.
guy and stuff. Yeah.
Well, okay, I also should ask since people will ask me to ask if I don't ask, so I'm asking. I know you mentioned that you've seen some of X-Men 97. I don't think you told me if you finished it or not, but even if you haven't, from what you've seen, how have you felt about the characterization and I guess just like the power utilization of Cyclops in that show?
Power utilization is really awesome. I think I have not finished it. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen maybe 7 or 8 episodes of it. And I think the characterization of pretty much everybody in that show is kind of boring.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow,
with
I think
some
it's a controversial
exceptions.
take.
Magneto's pretty good.
Yeah, I think he's pretty spot on.
But it's just like not really that deep in there. Like it's all very like kind of surface level and too fast paced for my taste.
Sure.
But
So people know, do you know where you stopped watching? Because I do think you may have stopped before they dive into some like darker subject matter, but I don't know.
that's interesting. So the last episode I saw, I think, was the one where it's like Deathbird and Leandra and Xavier having the vision of what happened on Genosha and being like, I have to go back to Earth.
Gotcha.
I
Interesting.
think that's the last one I watched.
Okay.
So I saw Gambit dying.
Yeah, yeah. There's
Yeah.
some that I will say the show for me mostly works with the characterization. I 100% agree on the pacing. I think the pacing of the show is pretty bad, but characters that I don't really feel like are voiced well, and I feel like yeah, I'm getting to the point where I'm like, I don't know if we'll ever see these characters done well in like an on-screen media depiction. Storm, I think, is
Oh my.
done really poorly, honestly. But I
Storm
know
has
that's also
never been.
I know it's an extension of like what people like from that original X-Men animated series too, though. But it's such a I don't like this version of the character really.
No, I really love Storm. I agree that like yeah, in every single live action movie and in this show, it's just like not doing it for me. The show is better than her characterizations in the movies for sure. But
Yeah. And then Jean also. I wish like something would be done differently with Jean. I guess I can't exactly put my finger on it, but it's kind of just the vanilla complaint, you know?
yeah, that's kind of how I feel about Scott in that show. Like yeah, he's upset, he's still having the trauma and everything, but just something about the either his dialogue or maybe the voice actor or something, it
Hmm.
feels a little too like cartoony, I guess, for lack of a better word, but
So I'm on the other side of that, I think, at least a little bit in the sense that one of the characters that, I normally I like Cyclops, but I normally wouldn't care too much about watching him in the animated show. I'd be like glued to some of the other like tertiary or secondary characters that I like more. But I like this depiction of Cyclops because like it did sort of hit that they're definitely hitting more on the caricature of like Boy Scout Cyclops. But he also has some fun sassy moments in the series too. So I like that element of like mixing into his personality. I don't think the story uses him that much too, though. Weirdly enough, I guess it will moving forward. For those who have continued watching it, no, but yeah, I don't know. And then also Rogue. I generally don't care about Rogue that much, but I don't know. The voice actress, I guess, and like the emotional journey Rogue's character goes on in X-Men 97, I found myself really, really liking. And I kind of liked, I don't know, I guess you may not have gone this far, but like I kind of like the darker Rogue going down the, sort of more her villainous past route.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
fun
I
stuff,
saw a
fun
bit of
stuff.
that. I saw a little bit of that.
But, just
I
always
like
interesting to hear people's thoughts on like these media depictions of X-Men as they come out. They're never as good as the comics, but they're always fun to see.
I agree, and I do like that pilot episode, like him and Wolverine's little interactions in the Blackbird. Like, yeah, I think Wolverine's really cool in the show, but they don't use him at all, really.
Yeah, but that's kind of it's nice to give him a little bit of a beat so that when he does get his moment in the show, like I don't know if you got to the Nightcrawler Wolverine little battle with the Sentinel bots or whatever.
I think so. Yeah.
Their sword fights.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's like the best Wolverine moment of the show. And it,
Okay.
because he was so underutilized during a lot of it, when that happens, it feels pretty nice to get this awesome like Wolverine action sequence too, where he's like,
Yeah.
not to like spoil anything, but like defending sort of, a core principle, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I need to keep watching it because I like it. I just stopped for some reason, but yeah, Cyclops power usage, like in I'm pretty sure this is the first episode, like amazing when in that opening sequence where he like busts into the warehouse and
Yes.
fights a bunch of dudes, like using the optic blast to slide along the floor and get into like closer range with someone. I was like, that is exactly what I want. Like, beautiful. And he does that later when they're falling out of the Blackbird, and he uses his optic blast to like slow his fall. I know he's done that in the comics before. He's done it. I don't think they actually showed it in this version of the flashback we read in 144, but I know like in another show of the flashback when him and Alex fall out of the plane, he does
Yeah,
that.
interesting. Yeah, I was trying to rack my mind and remember like the follow-up to that if there was anything because it mentions like the parachute being on fire as they're falling. And
Mhm.
I know those two get separated and whatnot, so I was just trying to remember the follow through.
Yeah, like he hits his head and forgets the part of his brain that could control the optic blast.
Yeah.
Is one version, and then of course Emma hypothesizes that perhaps it's all in his mind. But he goes to a
Us
hospital and like,
Krakoa era fans are smiling again.
okay, okay. Pretty sure he like blasts the roof off of a hospital,
Hmm.
But it was all freaking Sinister's plot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is why it is such a great moment of like just familial anger being released from Scott as he annihilates Sinister. Just like truly, I think that may be my favorite Scott Summers moment of all the comics that I've read. And there's cool Scott Summers moments.
I mean that's got to be up there. That's probably like the most satisfying like climactic moment that we've gotten from him that actually feels like earned through like decades of buildup. Because yeah, like at that point Alex too has been possessed and is now like the Goblin Prince or whatever, like gonna be like Madeline Pryor's new concubine or whatever, and they've got
Yeah.
the baby and his brother and Madeline there, and it's just like, you've ruined every chance of normal happiness I could have.
Oh, such
It's
great
great.
stuff. Again,
Yeah.
this is why I was really disappointed with that episode of X-Men 97 where they just like completely brush over the entirety of Inferno, which is like 3,000 pages of content, which like they can't do that all. But I low key when X-Men 97 was announced and they said they were going to use Madeline Pryor, I thought the entire season was going to be Inferno and Madeline
Yeah.
Pryor because you can do it.
I
But
fully agree. I mean, it seems
no.
like so much of the stuff that they do in like 2 or 3 episodes could be like running storylines throughout an entire season
It
in that
just
show.
it ruins it for me too because like she's like I'm Madeline Pryor and you're like oh okay why then
Yeah,
it's like the Goblin Queen and then you're like what why
I
are you the
know.
Goblin Queen what
That feels so much like the one of the worst examples in that show of like the meme of Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV, like just purely like reference for reference sake that has
yeah
no context in what's actually happening in the show. It's just like people be like, I know that costume.
made me so upset because also I was telling like people and fans. I was like, oh my God, guys, next week's like they're starting the Inferno stuff. It's gonna be so
Yeah.
great. And then for like the people who have not read Inferno and are like going to use this as like, oh, maybe I'll be potentially interested in reading it after watching the episode. I don't really think you would be. I don't think you, I think it only really works for people who've read the comic, but it doesn't work for those people also because it's such a diluted, weird version of it.
Yeah,
So like, who's
yeah.
it for? But okay, I'm
I don't
ranting.
know.
I'm ranting.
No, I agree though.
Okay, well, I think with that, any other defense of Scott Summers you want to throw in here at the end, just in case, we've got some Summers haters in the comments here. He is one of those characters that will get some hate every now and then.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, people who hate on Scott Summers, spend a day in his shoes and see if you do any better. Nobody's had more pressure put on him. Nobody's gone through more loss. Not like you got to compete for trauma, but
Hmm.
he's been through it, and it's insane that he can still come out of this other side. And even if you don't agree with every decision he makes, he's still in the right. He cares about mutant kind. He's a good, I don't know if I'll always say he's a good person, but he's trying.
Yeah,
And anybody that's on Wolverine's side in the X-Men schism, that's just crazy. Cyclops was right the whole time about Hope Summers. Hey, he wasn't in control when he killed Professor X. And honestly, like, he's coming back to life. All the X-Men should know he's coming back. Everyone also blames him for like Nightcrawler dying at that time too.
yeah.
Chill. Nightcrawler is literally found in Christian heaven and pirate sword fights his way out back to real life. So if you prefer
Yeah.
like that kind of X-Men story, I won't be mean, but that
Sure, sure.
yeah, swashbuckling Nightcrawler. I'm not here for it.
Oh, well, at some point I've got it on my list to read that two-issue limited Nightcrawler series where I think it's like sort of the first time he does that. I don't know how it's received. I've like not really heard much about it, but I'll have to get into that.
I'm getting off track, but I just think that, there's a lot of people who love. I know you're not a fan of Wolverine and the X-Men either, but like that's at the same time as Bendis's Uncanny X-Men, and I feel like gets talked about way more. And like, I'm sorry, I don't know if we cuss on this podcast, but F Team Wolverine at that time. I'm fully on the Team Cyclops side. Cyclops was right. Cyclops becomes like a slightly less terroristical version of Magneto during that time. So it's honestly
Yeah.
just perfect.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I feel like often Cyclops at his best becomes like the meld of Magneto ideals and Charles Xavier ideals and just sort of cherry picks like the best parts of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's like pretty interesting to watch, and it normally is like along the correct moral trajectory at least. They may like stutter step their way there, but they're going.
Yeah, and I feel like it's always interesting to see like what ideals is he like thinking about right now. Like maybe I don't agree with every single choice he makes, but you can see where he's coming from.
Yeah, and the fun thing about these comics and different writers, and some may say this is the not fun thing, but I argue overall it's a positive. It does have its negatives, but because the nature of like everyone working on these pieces together, he's also, and it's just realistic. People are fluid. His ideas on this stuff are fluid. So he's like trying things out, sort of like modular, creating your ideology, I guess, is what he's doing. But it's kind of fun to watch too, even though some writers like don't do as much with it or like don't necessarily understand how to build upon previous work. But like I said, overall, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Cyclops can be used as that sort of like writer surrogate character a lot of times. Like obviously not one to one, but I feel like he's usually like the mouthpiece of whatever like ideals the writer thinks that the X-Men should have at any
Yes.
given point in time. So, that's not always like a good thing for the story, but that can always, or at least usually, be like pretty interesting because that's where you get a lot of like real human emotion coming from, or like what an actual person's thoughts are about how they would handle like the mutant situation or whatever. So
Yeah, absolutely. And also just to add on to how great Cyclops is, I feel like I guess many of the X-Men are like this, but I don't know, not to get like too personal with it, but at times when I'm like down in life, turn to these characters, and I know they're like fictional characters, but the fact that they're like they have such strong characterizations that they feel like real people, and I get to watch them with their willpower and how they persevere and how like they're resilient in the face of their much more massive like personal losses than anything like I will ever have to deal with, and how
Yeah.
they like grapple with that in mostly like healthy ways, I guess. Maybe that's not entirely accurate, but you know what I mean. Like I feel like that also that like does a lot for me. And Cyclops is definitely like that. That is also part of the evolution of me liking him as a character. Like starting to just like be like, wow, like your internal stress and anxiety about these things, and like you're trying to find the right path and the right way to do things, like does really resonate.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think my favorite kind of stories are very like extreme, fantastical situations that still have grounding in very like human believable characters, which I don't think that's like unique to me. I know obviously a lot of people love that, but yeah, that's why I think stuff like X-Men and Star Wars and Game of Thrones is like some of the best stuff out there to read, because
Hmm.
they have such a good blend of high action and adventure. But it's like I don't care about action unless like I care about these people, and that's when X-Men is at its best, and when Cyclops is at his best is like when like the years of buildup behind him blasting Sinister to a
Yeah.
skeleton. Like that's when you're face to face with your baby being consumed by the techno-organic virus, and what's her name's only got enough juice for one jump into the future to save him. I'd challenge any of your listeners to try and go through that trial and come out the other side not completely mentally shattered.
Yeah. Hey, well, I hope none of the listeners do ever have to go through that, but if you do
I'm
want to
just
take up
joking.
Jackson's challenge, you go for it, and you let us know if you're as well adjusted as Scott Summers is.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
That's
but no, I very well said. And I just appreciate you hopping on and chatting X-Men with me today, Jackson. Anything else you'd like to say? Any other reminder of checking out the Beggars Canyon boys you'd like to drop here at the end?
Hey, sure. I mean, thanks for having me on. It's very fun to talk about. I don't think I've really been able to get into those thoughts out loud before, so pretty cathartic. But yeah, Beggars Canyon Boys, check it out if you want. If you're a Star Wars fan, I do say this on the first episode, but if you listen to the first episode and you're like, "Oh boy, sound quality not so good," it does get immediately better in the second episode. So give us a chance. But I think it's a lot of fun, and yeah, check it out. But thanks for having me. It's really fun to talk about, and you do a good job of making sure we cover all the bases. And I'm sure there's a million more things I'm forgetting just because there's so much Cyclops content out there. But
Hey,
yeah,
well, I was thinking about that too. If people would like it, maybe eventually we could do a Cyclops part two, because yeah, like you said, there's a lot of Cyclops content out there, and I think again, people might be interested in what you have to say about the Krakoa era when you do eventually get there.
yeah, I'll say maybe once I'm caught up to the modern day, we can come back. If you'll have me. It's
We'll have
your
to
show, man.
see.
It's up
We'll
to
have to
you.
see who you pissed off in the comments, really, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. Look,
Those Jean
I
Grey
wasn't
comments.
really calling out the listeners. I was just playing around, all right?
All right, all right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and you all have a great rest of your day.